Hello, this is Dr. Grande. Today I will analyze the case of Whitney Gray. First, I'll look at the background of this case, move to the timeline of the crime, then offer my analysis. Whitney Gray was born on February 26, 1994, in Iowa City, Iowa. At some point, she moved to Independence, Missouri. In 2013, she had a son named Junior Gray, and in 2016, she had a son named Bentley Rooks. Now moving to the timeline of the crime. On October 16, 2016, at 7:38 p.m., multiple 911 calls were placed reporting that a woman had been shot at the intersection of South Sterling Avenue and East Winter Road. When the police arrived, they found a silver Chevrolet Venture minivan off the road in a yard of a private residence at 1605 South Sterling Avenue. This is about 800 feet north of the intersection with Winter Road. Officers noticed that there was a bullet hole in the windshield of the minivan. On the ground, near the driver's side of the vehicle, they found 22-year-old Whitney Gray. She was on her back, unresponsive, and had blood on her face and chest. Whitney was later pronounced dead at the scene. Her cause of death was a single gunshot wound to the chest. In Whitney's minivan, there were 3 minors who were not injured, Whitney's 2 young sons and her 16-year-old niece. By examining video surveillance and speaking to witnesses, including Whitney's niece, the police were able to piece together what happened. Whitney, her sons, and her niece had taken the minivan to the Price Chopper grocery store located on the southeast corner of South Sterling Avenue and 23rd Street. Whitney shopped for groceries. She could be seen walking around the store. When she exited at 7:36 p.m., her minivan was already pulled up near the door with Whitney's niece in the passenger seat. Whitney could be seen handing the groceries she just purchased through the passenger side window to her niece. The minivan pulled out of the parking lot onto South Sterling Avenue, heading north. A white 2004 Toyota Sequoia SUV could be seen driving in that same direction at high speed. The SUV slowed down quickly as it approached Whitney's minivan, as if Whitney may have cut it a little too close when she pulled out of the parking lot. Both vehicles stopped at the traffic light at 23rd Street, so the white SUV would have needed to stop whether or not Whitney pulled out of the parking lot. When the light turned green, Whitney's minivan and the Toyota Sequoia SUV behind her continued north. The SUV was tailgating Whitney's vehicle. Whitney slammed on her brakes to teach the driver of the white SUV a lesson about tailgating. The SUV then passed the minivan on the right side, so close there was almost a collision. When the vehicles reached a red light at the intersection of East Winter Road, Whitney's minivan moved into the left turn lane. The Toyota Sequoia was in the right lane as if the driver intended on continuing north through the intersection. At this point, Whitney rolled down the window of her minivan and yelled at the driver of the Toyota Sequoia, saying something to the effect of, "I have kids in the car." The driver of the Sequoia, a white male, responded, "I don't give a blank." Whitney directed her niece to throw a cup of water out of the passenger window at the SUV, which her niece did. Just after this, the SUV moved forward and the driver fired a single shot through the windshield of the minivan, striking Whitney in the chest. Whitney told her niece that she had been shot. The driver of the Toyota Sequoia fled the scene quickly, driving north on South Sterling Avenue, as Whitney's vehicle slowly moved north. With Whitney mortally wounded, her niece moved over to the driver's seat and was able to bring the minivan to a stop 150 feet past a set of railroad tracks. On the pavement near the scene of the shooting, the police found a spent .40 caliber S&W case. Investigators were very interested in identifying the man who was driving the Toyota Sequoia. They examined video surveillance from various places on South Sterling Avenue. Eventually, they found something of interest on a video at a Quick Trip gas station and convenience store located at the intersection with Route 40. This is 2.1 miles south of the Price Chopper grocery store where the incident started. At 7:29 p.m., a white Toyota Sequoia had pulled into the gas station using the South Sterling Avenue entrance. At 7:30 p.m., a white male exited the driver's seat of the SUV and entered the convenience store. As it turns out, this Quick Trip was scheduled to be demolished the next day. so that a new Quick Trip could be constructed. Due to this upcoming demolition, the store was low on inventory. The man appeared to be frustrated by the lack of selection and exited the store without buying anything. At 7:31 p.m., he entered the Toyota Sequoia and pulled onto South Sterling Avenue, driving north. The police ran the license plate of this vehicle and discovered it was registered to a man named James Taylor. This was not the famous singer, although both men knew something about heartbreak. On the next day, October 17, the police interviewed James. He told them that the Toyota Sequoia they were looking for belonged to his son, 36-year-old Christopher Taylor. James had seen the story about the shooting on the news and was worried that Christopher was involved. He told the police that Christopher was a paranoid loner who tried to stay off the grid because he was afraid of the government. James went to his son's residence on East Shelley Road, but said that Christopher's Toyota Sequoia was not there. The landlord let him in so he could check on his son's well-being. James noticed that several items appeared to be missing, including clothing, camping gear, a rifle chambered in 5.56 millimeter, a pistol chambered in .40 caliber S&W, 4 gold pieces, 100 ounces of silver, and an acoustic guitar. The police knew that if Christopher had these items on him, the situation could get very unpleasant for the public, especially because of that guitar. The police went to the car dealership where Christopher purchased the Toyota Sequoia. This dealership routinely installed GPS tracking devices on the vehicles they sold, just in case the buyers decided not to make the payments. They told the police that Christopher's Sequoia was at a La Quinta Inn in Box Elder, South Dakota. The police in South Dakota arrested Christopher without incident. Here is the story he supplied during an interview with investigators. On the night of the shooting, Christopher was driving north on South Sterling Avenue. At 23rd Street, he encountered a slow-moving vehicle. This was Whitney's minivan. When he passed the minivan on the right, Whitney sped up and yelled at him that she had kids in the car. He responded by saying, "You can at least do the speed limit." Christopher then increased his speed, but the minivan did as well. A person in the passenger seat threw something at his Toyota Sequoia. This was the cup of water thrown by Whitney's niece. Christopher claimed that he found himself reacting to contact, like his military training took over and his actions were automatic. He pulled his pistol from a holster and fired one shot at the minivan due to muscle memory. He said, "I didn't think, it just happened." Christopher was charged with second-degree murder and armed criminal action. In the state of Missouri, armed criminal action is when a person uses, displays, or is armed with a deadly weapon during the commission of a felony. The state was confident they could get a conviction. After all, Christopher admitted he was the shooter. His trial started in 2018. On June 13 of that year, Christopher Taylor was found not guilty of second-degree murder, but guilty of the lesser charge of first-degree involuntary manslaughter. He was also found guilty of armed criminal action. On August 24, 2018, he was sentenced to 7 years in prison for involuntary manslaughter and 17 years for armed criminal action. The sentences were to be served concurrently, so Christopher ended up with just 17 years. Now moving to my analysis. Christopher Taylor maintains his innocence. He claimed that the killing of Whitney Gray occurred due to a negligent discharge. The state, of course, disagrees. They believe Christopher intentionally killed Whitney because he was angry. This was a road rage killing. This brings me to the question, was Christopher guilty of murder? Let's take a look at the evidence both for and against the idea he was guilty, starting with the inculpatory factors. Christopher Taylor initiated the confrontation on the night of the shooting by tailgating Whitney Gray. He cannot argue that Whitney caused the confrontation by cutting him off when she pulled out of the grocery store because Christopher was driving too fast. Even if Whitney did cut it a little too close, there was no reason for Christopher to tailgate her. Tailgating is illegal. Christopher was breaking the law. Video surveillance from the Quick Trip supports the theory that Christopher was already angry when he encountered Whitney. He was upset because the convenience store was low on inventory. Whitney slammed on her brakes while Christopher was tailgating her. This was a bad idea, but it did not give Christopher the right to kill her. Similarly, When Whitney's niece threw a cup of water at Christopher's SUV, this did not put Christopher in danger. He did not have the right to defend himself based on a flying cup of water. There was never an imminent threat. Christopher admitted that he retrieved his pistol and fired the shot that killed Whitney. He also admitted that he fled the scene and traveled to South Dakota to escape the authorities. During an interview with the police, Christopher stated that murder was an unforgivable sin, which could be considered an acknowledgement that he committed murder. Christopher's entire defense was based on the idea that he reacted reflexively when the cup of water was thrown at his SUV. This was the result of his basic training in the military. He claimed that the flying cup of water triggered muscle memory. He automatically pulled his pistol from the holster, put his finger on the trigger, pointed the weapon at Whitney's minivan, and pulled the trigger. This was outside his conscious control. He had no way to stop it. The problem for Christopher is that muscle memory does not work the way he described. It is not an unconscious reflex, rather it's a trained motor skill, like tying shoes or playing a musical instrument. Muscle memory allows tasks to become faster and more fluid, not involuntary. Killing somebody with a firearm requires multiple conscious decisions, which Christopher made. He chose to use lethal force. Even if one were to believe Christopher's distorted characterization of muscle memory, he went to basic training in 2007, 9 years before the shooting. Furthermore, according to the prosecution, Christopher did not even complete basic training. So Christopher would have people believe that from this brief experience 9 years earlier, he became an automatic killing machine. Nothing in Christopher's training would have endorsed using lethal force in response to airborne beverages. Moving to the exculpatory factors, Whitney slammed on her brakes and her niece threw a cup of water at Christopher's SUV. Some people may find these actions consistent with provocation. That's pretty much it for the exculpatory factors. When considering all the evidence in this case, do I believe that Christopher Taylor was guilty of murder? Yes, in my opinion, he was guilty of second-degree murder beyond a reasonable doubt. The jury made the wrong decision. What do I think happened in this case? This is just a theory, my opinion. Christopher was self-centered, immature, impulsive, angry, aggressive, violent, petty, vindictive, paranoid, deceptive, had low frustration tolerance, and had a sense of entitlement. He had anti-government views and considered himself to be a prepper. This is someone who prepares for the apocalypse by stockpiling weapons, food, and other supplies. Christopher went to the Quick Trip in order to make a purchase, but the store didn't have what he was looking for. Ironically, a prepper couldn't handle a store having low inventory. One would think that if a prepper could calmly deal with any problem, it would be this one. Isn't a shortage of supplies exactly what they are preparing for? Christopher was ready to take on a global collapse, but couldn't handle an understocked convenience store. Either way, Christopher couldn't handle it. He went into a rage, climbed back into his SUV, and drove at an excessive speed on South Sterling Avenue. He was looking for trouble at this point. After driving 2.1 miles, he saw Whitney's minivan pull out in front of him. Again, she was pulling out of the parking lot for the grocery store. He believed that she cut it too close, and he became fixated on her. As he was tailgating Whitney, she slammed on her brakes, which only made Christopher more angry. He almost collided with the minivan while passing on the right. Whitney yelled at Christopher, indicating that she had children in the vehicle, but he did not care. When the cup of water hit his SUV, Christopher decided that someone needed to die. He fired his weapon at the minivan, killing Whitney. It's not clear if he was aiming for Whitney or Whitney's niece, but the point of firing his weapon was to cause death. After Christopher was arrested, he claimed that muscle memory caused a negligent discharge. This ridiculous story was the only thing he could think of because his actions were inexcusable. Amazingly, he ended up with the most gullible jury in the universe, and they convicted him of the lesser charge of involuntary manslaughter. He had described his thought process as, "I didn't even think, it just happened," which ironically also sums up the jury's decision-making process. Christopher needed to be in prison for the rest of his life, but now he will get out in plenty of time to once again protect society from the existential threat of airborne liquids. Those are my thoughts on the case of Whitney Gray. Thank you so much for watching. I'll talk to you soon. Just a reminder that I have a Patreon account which features over 300 pre-release videos. These videos are of the same quality as the videos that I release to the public. When I put a video in pre-release status, it often stays there for several months, if not a year. I will put the link to Patreon in the description for this video.